The next example follows on pretty directly from this one. Okay, so it uses this JavaScript lightbox functionality as well. But in addition to that, what we're going to do is output all of our content on a single long scrolling page. So what I might do is load up the completed version of this and show you what it looks like, and then I'll take you through the code and how I built it up to that point. Alright, so this is what the completed example looks like. You'll notice that we have all of the same content, but rather than splitting it across separate actual pages, okay, we're basically just loading in the same template parts that we had, but loading them all into one page. Okay, so I've got my what was my home page. I've got my cats category, my dogs category, which are both styled using the same style. Then I have my blogs category, which is styled different, and then I have my About Me page, which contains what was still on my About Me page. Okay, and then I have my header and my footer still. Okay, and so that's the first big difference, is actually how the content's all laid out on one single page. And then the second big difference is we need a way to change how our menu operates, because when I click on these, I don't want it to load a new page. I actually just want it to go to the appropriate part of that one page. Okay, and I still have this external link, which also works as well. Okay, so so it seems quite simple, but there's certain things that we have to be careful about. We have to sacrifice a little bit of some of the things that WordPress does automatically for us. Okay, because what we're doing now in this single page layout is we're starting to use WordPress not specifically in the way that it was intended to do. Intended to be. So now there's nothing particularly wrong with that, but we just have to do a bit more of the heavy lifting ourselves rather than relying on WordPress. Okay, so I'll show you how I've actually built this up. I will switch back to the theme as we had it. Okay, there we go. All right, now a bunch of this is sort of just fiddly small changes with the code. So rather than create everything from scratch, I will do a bunch of copying from the completed example, but I will do my best to go through and explain to you exactly what all the changes are and what they mean. So the first thing is I've got my current theme folder here. You'll notice all the files here. And what I might do is just show you the file content of the completed example here. Sorry, not that one. Single page. There we go. Okay, so what you'll notice, the big difference you'll notice is that we've got the addition of these 4 template files here. Okay, and they all start with loop hyphen something. Okay, now what these are is they pretty much directly map to the template files that I already had. The only difference is now we're not relying on WordPress picking a template for us based on the URL. We actually have to go and figure out which template part we need based on the menu item and then include that manually ourselves. Okay, so the way I created these was I actually modified my existing. So for the loop-blog.php, okay, I modified the existing category blog. I essentially renamed it, and if you look at the difference between them, okay, if I just open up those 2 files, there's my existing category blog, and here's now my loop blog template. You notice that the difference between them is not much at all. Okay, all I've really done is removed the header and the footer. Okay, because I don't want on each section for my header and my footer to appear. I only want that to appear once. Okay, so I've removed the header and the footer from Loop Blog, and then the only other change I've made is to include a heading here, which on each section of the page will output the major heading of that. Okay, so they're the only changes I made, and the reason that I'm renaming them is because I'm deliberately now trying to avoid having WordPress recognize these as a template that it recognizes, okay? Because I don't want it to open up as an existing template by itself now on a page. So to do that, I'm ensuring that I rename everything starting with loop hyphen, because I know there's no existing WordPress templates that start with that. Okay, so I've done that for essentially all of my existing templates here. So so category.php becomes, categoryblog.php becomes loopblog.php. So I'm going to copy that across to my theme there. Okay, the regular category.php, which represents my cats and my dogs category section. Alright, I've renamed this to loop gallery. Okay, and I'll copy that across from the completed example. The existing front page.php, okay, which is essentially this, the existing front page, I'm renaming that to loophome.php. So I'll copy that over. And the last one is my existing about me page, okay, which uses page template no sidebar. Okay, I've renamed that to just loop page. Okay, so I'm going to copy that across like that. Okay, so now these are actually the 4 template files that I'm going to include in my single page, which will manage how the content for each of those sections now appear. Okay, so I've got a bunch of existing templates that I'm not going to use anymore, so I could delete those, but I'll just leave them there for now, and maybe we can tidy them up later. You'll notice that there's much fewer templates actually being used in the completed example. Okay, so what I want to do now is essentially there's going to be one template file that gets loaded now, okay, for the single page layout. It's actually going to be my front page PHP template. Okay, so as it exists now, my front page.php template only represents this one bit of content here. Okay, but I need to change this quite significantly now so that it loads in all of those other bits of content from these 4 sections here. Okay, so so the biggest change here is going to come from my front page.php. So what my front page looks like at the moment, okay, that's now actually been sort of included in my loop home template part here. The front page itself, template itself, I'm going to basically completely destroy everything except for the get header and the get footer. Okay, so if I do that, okay, that's what my site looks like now. Okay, basically I have my header, okay, which also outputs my navigation, and I have my footer here. Alright, and then what I need to do is write some code which will output all of those sections for me. Now the way I'm going to do this is by basically querying what's being output on my menu here and using the information about these menu items to decide what content to go and get on the page. Okay, so what I might do is actually copy across the completed code for this and then break it down for you bit by bit. Okay, let's see. Alright, so this is what now my new front page template is going to look like. Okay, and what I will do is, because there's going to be some styling changes as well, I'll copy across the completed style.css file, like so. Okay, and now we have the single page layout. Okay, so I'll explain to you what it does. This is only half the equation, all right? We still need to deal with actually getting the menu to work. But first of all, I just want to explain to you how I've actually output all the content on the one page. Okay, so let's go and look at the front page.php. First things first, I include the header. Okay, that's the same as always. But then what I need to do is this little bit of code here, okay, which actually I'm calling a function, a WordPress function called wp-getNavMenuItems, okay, and then asking it for the menu called main, okay, which is what I've named my menu here, okay, which contains home, cats, dogs, blog, adopt a pet, and about me. Okay, so what this function will do is actually return to me an object that contains a bunch of information about each of those menu items. Okay, and I can show you exactly what that looks like by outputting that information in the console. So in my installation of WordPress here, I've installed this plugin called FirePHP here, and what that does is it allows me to use a PHP function called FB like this and output anything I put inside of here to the JavaScript console here. Okay, so it's essentially, it allows me to do the same thing that doing console.log does in JavaScript, but from PHP. Okay, so it can be a really useful testing tool. And the only reason I've done this is because I want to show you what this actually returns. Okay, so if I output the contents of this menu items object returned from that function in the console, okay, we can see what it looks like. Okay, and this is it here. This is what it's returning. So it returns me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 objects. Okay, index 0 to 5. All right, and each of those objects represents one of these 6 menu items over here. Okay, so this is going to represent the first menu item, and if I click down and look at all the information it contains, okay, it contains, well, a whole bunch of information about this menu item. Okay, so it has an ID, it has things like the post date, okay, but in addition to all of those things, it includes some useful things that I can actually use. So I can actually access the text of that menu item, okay, and I can also, very importantly, it will tell me what type of content that it's actually linking to. Okay, so what most of this code is replacing is the WordPress logic that goes, you're looking at a particular type of content, this is the template that I'm going to load for that. Okay, we can't really rely on that anymore because we're not opening things in their own pages. But I can essentially duplicate that same behavior by looking at the menu item objects and knowing what type of content they're looking at. Okay, so that's exactly what I'm doing then in this next bit of code. Okay, so after I get the information from all those menus, I have a big for each loop, okay, which basically loops over all of the menu items. So it will do all of this code, okay, once for each of the menu items that exist there, okay, and within that it does these things. Okay, first of all, it checks to see what this type property is of the menu item. Okay, so if I look in this first one for the home and I look down here under type, okay, then the value of that is post type. Okay, if I look at the next menu item, which should be the menu item for cats, okay, then the type is taxonomy. Okay, so taxonomy meaning anything that's a category is going to have that type taxonomy. So the next one, which is dogs, should also have that type as well. Okay, now the second last one, which is my link to the Adopt-a-Pet external link, okay, is going to have a type of custom here. Now the reason that I need to know this first of all is because when I'm looking at outputting the content on my page, okay, for each of these menu items there's some content that I want to output, okay, except for this Adopt-a-Pet one. For the Adopt-a-Pet menu item, there's nothing I want to output on the page. I just want that to sit there as an external link to another website. Okay, so that's why the very first thing I'm checking for is if that menu item type is custom, then I write this line of PHP continue, which basically says don't do anything else in this loop, just skip to the next menu item. Okay, so that's the first thing I'm checking for, is if it's a custom menu item or a link to an external site, don't do anything. Okay, otherwise do this bit of code here. So as you can see from the comment, this is saying set up the custom query. So what we need to look at now, which is also something new we haven't looked at, is the WordPress query object. Okay, now the WordPress query object is the thing that actually determines what content is going to be returned from WordPress for you to display in your template. Okay, so in the case of if it's a category, okay, then it's posts in a particular category. If it's a page, then it's that page. Alright, so it's actually that query object that determines, in the usual case, which template WordPress is going to load. Okay, but because we're putting everything on one page now, as I said, we can't rely on WordPress doing that for us. So what we actually need to do is modify the WordPress query object, okay, so we can get the content that we need for each of these sections ourselves. Alright, so we can actually manipulate that WordPress query object ourselves, and what we do is we create an instance of this WP query object, and then we send it an array of arguments which are like search parameters, which will determine what that then returns to us. Okay, so if you want, you can look into this WP query object in the WordPress documentation. Okay, and you'll notice essentially it's quite similar to actually like searching for things in a URL, or passing information in a URL. There's parameters, okay, and then you give them values, and that determines what the query returns. Okay, so for example, this example query here will return all posts where the author ID is one of these. Okay, let's see if we can find something with categories. Okay, so this is an example of calling the WordPress query object, asking for only posts that have the category ID of 4. Okay, so essentially what we're doing is we're passing it a bunch of information which will control how the post that WordPress returns to us. Okay, now that information is being built up with this bit of code here. Okay, so depending on what type of menu object this is here, I can modify the WordPress query and tell it to give me, in the case if I'm outputting the content from the cats category, then I can tell it to give me that content. Okay, so that's what this conditional statement is doing here. Okay, it's saying if the menu item object is a category, okay, so that will apply to the cats and the dogs menu item. Okay, then it's creating this array here, okay, because the WP query object needs to have its parameters passed to it as an array. Okay, and I can basically tell it to give me a particular post type, okay, and a particular category by setting these two parameters here. Okay, so the important one here is passing it, saying out I want the category, okay, and this menu item object ID will actually contain the menu items object ID if we look at one of these category ones. Okay, that object ID is actually going to represent the ID of the category. Okay, so using that bit of information there, that's enough information to send to the WP query function to tell it give me all the posts that are in the category of cats, or that particular category ID. Okay, so that solves those two cases where we're looking for a category of posts, and then anything else we can get by sending the arguments like this. Okay, there's a parameter which is just the lowercase letter p, okay, and that will be looking for a post ID, and the post type will be page. Okay, so it's a little bit archaic, convoluted as to why these necessarily have to be that way, and if you care about that, again, you can read up on this WP query object in the documentation if you want. But again, if all you care is what you need to write in order to get this to work, okay, they're the arguments you need to set in order to get a category, okay, and they're the arguments you need to set to get a page, okay, and they're the only two types of things that are likely going to be in your menu. They're the only two things you can really link to, is a category or a page. Okay, and in the case of the external links, we don't want to output anything, so we're ignoring those anyway. Okay, so once we've got the correct arguments for that query, this part here is actually modifying the WordPress query, or generating a WordPress query, so that when it comes to the point where we're including our templates, and we say the content, or the author, or the post, they're going to retrieve the content from the correct post, okay, whether they're the cats category, or the dogs category, or the home page, or the about me page. Okay, so that there, down to that point, okay, is setting up the WordPress query, and then the second part is determining which of these four template parts we should include for each of those menu items. Okay, so the way that we're going to do that is actually we'll rely on having this WordPress query set up. So once the WordPress query is being created, we have access to these regular template tags like isCategory, which will say if we're looking for a category. Okay, so essentially these conditions here will determine which of these templates to use depending on the post that we want for each particular menu item. Okay, for each of these menu items. So the first one is saying, okay, if it's a category, and then in this case, if the category is blog, then get the template part blog here. Okay, and the reason it's just blog and not loop-blog is because the part where I'm actually including it down here adds those bits on itself. Okay, it will add loop hyphen at the beginning and PHP to the end. Okay, so that template part blog will refer to this loopblog.php. Okay, so then this here is saying, okay, if it is in a category but the category is not blog, okay, then it's going to be the cats or the dogs template that we want. So go and look for the template part gallery. Okay, so we'll get that loopgallery.php. Then it's saying, okay, if it's not a category but the menu item title is home, then get the template part home. Okay, otherwise, if it's none of those things and the menu item's object type is a page, then go and get the template part page. Okay, so for the About Me page, it will load that one. Alright, so by the end of this bit of code here, that template part variable should have one of these values: blog, gallery, home, or page. Okay, so then I can actually output the template there. Alright, and I do that by using an include statement here, and then using this WordPress function called locate template. Okay, so locate template simply takes the name of a PHP file and goes and looks in the current theme directory for that file. Okay, so I'm building up the name of that PHP file by starting it with loop hyphen and then adding that template part variable, which will be one of these four values, and then to the end of that adding .php. So this entire line will go and include one of these templates in there. Okay, now around that template, okay, I'm just wrapping that in a HTML section tag. Okay, and then one of these templates will be included there, and then that takes care of the regular content that will be output on that template itself. Okay, so that's essentially how the content is then output. Okay, so it will load the front page.php file. It will go and ask for a list of menu item objects. Then it will loop through each of those. Okay, it will determine how to modify the WordPress query in order to get the correct content for each of these sections. Okay, and then it will do a similar thing in order to determine which of these template files to load. Okay, and these template files were based off the same ones that we had when we were loading them in separate pages. Okay, so that results in it being output like this. So if you notice, if I examine this code here, then each of these major sections, let me just zoom out so we can see a few of them. Okay, each of them, there is a section, okay, which you can see highlighted when I hover over it. Okay, now the next thing to notice that I've done is for each of these section tags, I've actually output the body class on each of these. Okay, so that might seem a bit unusual as to why I've done it there rather than in the header section as I normally would here on the body. Okay, and the reason I'm doing that is again because we're taking what used to be separate pages that had their own header and footer section and their own body tag, and we're now including them in the one page. So I was previously using the body class styles in order to style, say, my my cats and dogs category different to my blog category. Okay, so I can still make use of those by outputting the body class on the section that contains now each of these, what I guess you could call virtual pages. Okay, so you can see if I look at the section which is surrounding my dogs category here, okay, it's still outputting all of those nice classes for me which say that it gives me category dogs, and all of the other stuff that I might want. So I can still make use of those even though each of these sections no longer has their own body tag. Okay, I'm using the body class function, but I'm just outputting it on a section now instead of a body tag. Okay, so that's the first half of this equation in getting this to work. The second part, which is mostly done in JavaScript, is all to do with basically intercepting how this menu works and getting these to, rather than open the sections on a new page, simply just navigate to a different part of that single page. Okay, so in order to do that, it's all essentially JavaScript. And again, rather than write this out from scratch, I'm just going to copy it across from the completed example and then do my best to explain to you what each bit of the JavaScript is doing. Okay, so here's my main.js file now. As you can see, it's a bit longer. It still has this section at the top, okay, which handles the lightbox pop-up stuff. Okay, so that hasn't changed from the previous example. Okay, that stuff all still works nicely. Or sorry, it will when I actually save that file and refresh the page. Okay, that stuff all still works. Okay, those lightbox pop-up links still load. Okay, and I guess that's the main reason I wanted to do the lightbox pop-up thing first, because usually when people have a single page layout, the idea is to keep all the content in the same page without re-navigating to a different page. So that's usually why someone will use something like this to show more detailed content. Okay, so that's all still there. That hasn't changed. The things that have changed, okay, is basically all relating to how the menu works. Okay, so what I've done here is, okay, first of all, this first part, as you can see by the comment here, I'm saying create a click handler function for all menu items except those that are external links. Okay, so again, I want all of these menu items to scroll to a particular part of the page except for this one here. Okay, I still want this to operate as a regular link which opens up an external page. So essentially what I've done here is this jQuery selector will select all of those links, okay, and I add this extra bit in here which is a jQuery selector called not, which says, well, exclude from that any list item which has the class of menu item type custom. Okay, and if we look in the HTML source, okay, at that adopt a pet link there, we look at the list item, okay, we can see that that has menu item type custom, okay, and that's the only one that has them. Alright, so this now entire selector, okay, will select just the anchor tags, okay, within the list items for everything except that external link. Okay, and then what I'm doing is on all of those list items adding a click handler function. Okay, so that's what this bit of code is here. This is the function which will execute in response to clicking any of these menu items. Okay, any of these menu items except for that adopt a pet link. So the first thing I need to do is I'm calling this thing called event.preventDefault. So I'm passing this event object that represents that click event to the event handler function, and by writing event.preventDefault, what it does is it stops the link from navigating to a new page. Okay, if I don't include that, okay, it will still start scrolling, but you'll see after it starts scrolling it will still navigate to the new page. So that's what the prevent default method is meant to do. It stops the default behavior of clicking on a link. Okay, and then I'll skip this bit here and talk about that in a moment. The third thing that I'm doing in response to clicking on one of those links is that I have to, again, because I'm not navigating to a new page and the active state of these list items is not being changed when I click on them, I have to do that manually in JavaScript. Okay, so that's what that bit of code is doing there. If I don't have that in, okay, I can click and the scrolling will still work, but the active link never changes. Okay, so that's what these two lines of code are doing here. The first line is removing the current menu item style from all of the list items. Okay, and then the second line is then adding the current menu item to whichever anchor tag's parent list item was clicked. Okay, so that's what those two lines of code do. Alright, so now when we click on one, it does actually update the active state of that menu item. Okay, and then this middle bit here, okay, is calling a function called scroll to anchor. Alright, and then passing here this bit here which says this.html. Now in the context of the anchor tags click handler, okay, $this refers to whichever anchor tag I've clicked on. Okay, so this.html is simply just going to be the text content of whichever anchor tag I've clicked on. Right, so if I click on About Me, alright, then this here, you can think of this as simply passing About Me to this scroll to anchor function. Okay, so think of this as passing whatever is the text of the menu item that we're clicking on. Alright, and it's passing it to this function I've written called scroll to anchor. So if we go and look at that, here's that scroll to anchor function here. Okay, and it's doing a couple of things. The first thing it's doing is essentially these two lines here, which is the first thing it's doing is going and finding an anchor that exists within the page and finding the appropriate anchor based on which menu item we've clicked on, and then the second line is scrolling to that. Okay, now when I say it's going to find a particular anchor tag, they're actually anchor tags that I've output within the front page template. Okay, so here's the section, okay, which contains the content of each of those sections, and just above that here, okay, I've created an empty anchor tag, okay, and all it's responsible for is simply sitting in a position at the top of each of those sections, so that when I scroll to that section, it knows where to scroll to. Okay, and so I've given these anchor tags an attribute data anchor, and I've output the menu item title here. So what you'll notice is that just above each of these sections, okay, so there's the first section. Scroll up there. There's the first section. Okay, and just above that, there's an A tag with a data anchor attribute of home. And then we have one for cats, dogs, blog, and about me. Okay, so the only reason that they're there is to sit there, so as a position to know, so that the JavaScript code that I write knows where to scroll to. Okay, and you'll notice I've very specifically given them a data anchor which matches up with the text of these links here. Alright, and that's so that this line of code here, okay, can go and find, this selector here says go and find me an anchor tag with the data anchor attribute that equals this anchor ID or AID parameter that I've sent to it. Alright, and if you remember what I just said is that this bit here, what gets sent to it is the text of whatever menu item I've clicked on. Okay, so about me here is going to go and match up with the data anchor about me here. Okay, if I click on that, if I click on cats, it's going to go and match up with the data anchor cats here. Okay, so that's what this first line here does. Is it asks to go and find the anchor which has that data anchor attribute which matches the menu item text that I've clicked on. Alright, and then the second line is simply just the code that animates the scrolling. Okay, so you can scroll a web page by using this bit of jQuery here. So you select the body tag, alright, and then first of all I'm calling stop in case it's already scrolling, and then I'm calling the jQuery animate function, and if you pass it these parameters, okay, basically you pass it a property called scroll top and tell it where you want it to scroll to. And so I'm using that anchor tag and its offset, which gives the basically the Y position of it in the page, and then the top of that, and that will tell it to scroll the page to wherever this anchor tag is sitting. Okay, and then this slow just tells it how quickly to do it. Okay, so the result of those two things is that when I click on this now, okay, it will go and find the position of the appropriate anchor point and we'll scroll to that. Okay, so that's those two lines there are responsible for that, and this last bit here, okay, what it actually does is you'll notice when I'm clicking on any of these links, if you notice up here the address bar will change. So when I click on cats, okay, you'll notice that it changes here to #cats, and then the same thing for these other sections here. Now that's what this bit of code here is responsible for. Now you don't necessarily need this, okay, it won't function any differently if you don't have it, but what we don't have if we don't put that in there is we've got no way in the address bar of determining which section of the page we're looking at. Okay, so that's something else that we sort of lost by no longer having our content split up over different pages. When we had them split up over different pages, we could bookmark those different pages based on their URL. But now we can't bookmark different sections because the address bar doesn't change. So if we add this little bit of code here, okay, what it does is it modifies the URL for a different section, so a user could now come and bookmark this particular part of the page as separate from, say, this part of the page. Okay, so it's something little, but it helps if you think a user's going to want to bookmark a particular section of your one-page layout. So in terms of what these three lines are actually doing, okay, first of all, the document.title, okay, all that's doing is setting, if you know, well, it's setting the title, where is it here? Okay, the title tag in the head section of the HTML file, okay, it will be modifying that. Okay, and that reflects what's output in the title of the tab here. So what that's doing is setting the document title to this anchor ID, okay, which as we saw was the text for whatever menu item we clicked on. So you'll notice when I click on cats, okay, up here will change to cats. Alright, and the same thing for whatever section we click on. Okay, and then this line here is what is actually modifying the address. Okay, so it's adding hash and then the particular section here. So window.location.hash, we're setting to that same thing. Alright, and then the last part here is actually modifying the browser history. So what we're doing is anytime we go to a new section of this page, which for us is a new section of our site, it's actually putting in a new entry into the browser history. So then we can actually use the back and the forward buttons to navigate to different sections within that page of our site as well. Okay, so that's what that third line is doing there. Okay, so that's modifying the address bar. Now there's still a couple of other things in here as well. There's this bit of code here which I've sort of skipped over. So what you can see is this is performing a jQuery selector for an anchor tag with a class of goToTop. Okay, and essentially what it's doing there is the same thing. If I click on that, it will animate the page to scroll all the way to the top, and again modify the history push state and prevent the default behavior. Okay, so I haven't actually put that that anchor tag into the code, but in my completed example here, which I'll just copy across from, okay, I've got this extra anchor tag here, which again, like the anchor tag for each of my sections, is purely designed just to sit there and be a placeholder so that when I click on this, it knows where to go to. Sorry, actually that's not correct. This is actually going to be something visual that I can click on. So I'm going to put that in my header, and the styling for this is going to make it such that this has a fixed position that always shows up at the bottom of my page. Okay, so another thing, given that this is a very long page, it might be useful to have this link here which always allows me to quickly go to the top. Okay, so that's exactly what that's doing there. And this, okay, this click handler function there is the code which responds to the click on that, and again using the same method that I did to scroll to any of those sections, just simply scrolls all the way to the top of the page. Okay, now the last part of this is, I'll just remove this part, refresh the page. Okay, so that's one solution to having long content, and then because you don't want the user to have to scroll all the way back up to the top to click on the menu each time. Okay, so this is one solution to it, is give them a link back up to the top where they can then click on the menu. Okay, but possibly a better solution is to actually have the menu be a sticky menu. Okay, stick to the top. Now, if you want, you can have the whole header styled as fixed so that it's always there, and have the content scroll underneath that. But what I've done here is sort of a combination between a static and a fixed header. So essentially this code here, this JavaScript code, might look a little complex, but all it's really doing here is saying if the window scroll position is above the bottom of this header, okay, then just have the menu in its regular place. Okay, it's a static menu. But as soon as the window scroll position drops below that bottom of that header, okay, then change that menu to be have a CSS position of fixed, okay, and fix it to the top. And so this is what this is doing, okay. It's basically, depending on the scroll position of the window, okay, it's setting the CSS position style on that main menu container either to fixed or to static. And then the last little thing it's doing that might not be immediately clear why I've got it in there is adding a bit of extra padding to each section or removing padding to each section. And the reason that I need that is because if I don't have it, what you notice is that when I scroll down here, when I get below this, you'll notice sort of a visual jump. Okay, so you can see how the content there sort of jumps weirdly. Okay, that's because as soon as I take this menu out of its static positioning and make it fixed, okay, it's no longer sitting there in the normal flow and pushing the content down by however many pixels this is, 41 I think. So when it becomes fixed, everything jumps up by the amount of height that's there. So all I'm doing is that when I make the position fixed, okay, I'm adding extra padding to the top of that section equivalent to the height of that menu. Okay, and then when it's going back to its static positioning, I'm setting that padding top back to 0. Okay, so that just gives me a smoother transition between this. Okay, so this is sort of a complex example of achieving that. If all you want is a fixed header, then all you have to do is style this header section to be fixed all the time. But I thought I'd just show you that because inevitably someone will see that done on a page and ask me how to do it anyway. Okay, so that's how you do that. And then the very last bit of JavaScript here is this little bit here. Okay, if I remove that, it might not be immediately evident on such a small display, but if I zoom out so it looks more like it would say on a large 24-inch or 30-inch display, okay, you can see that the content is visible, or multiple content is visible across the one screen. Now again, if you look at most of the examples of a one-page layout, what you'll see is that most people just want the window, they just want one section's content to take up the entire window and not view the next one until you scroll down to it. So you can achieve that a few ways. The quick and dirty way of doing that is to set a minimum height on each of these sections. Okay, but then if let's say you want to allow for the largest possible display, then you could set a minimum height of this to something like 1200 pixels, okay, to take up even say a 30-inch display, or more, 1600 pixels say. But the problem with that is if you then go down to a really small display, you'll have this huge amount of extra space that you'll have to scroll through to get to the next section. So what this bit of code here is basically dynamically sets that using JavaScript based on the current height of the browser window. Okay, so what this is doing is for each of those section elements, it's setting the min height, the CSS minimum height to whatever the window height is. Okay, and it's doing this in response to the browser resize event and also the load event, so it does it once as soon as it loads the page. So we'll notice if I remove the load event option and I just do it on resize, okay, then you'll be able to see the difference in what it looks like. So this is what it looks like normally as soon as I resize the browser. Okay, it resizes each section so that it takes up a minimum of the full height of the browser, like that. Okay, but I don't want the user to have to resize the browser to trigger it, so I'm also performing that on the load event as well. Okay, so now even if you have a very large display or a very small display, okay, I can size this down. Okay, and there's not a huge amount of space left between each one. Okay, so it will dynamically, nicely, responsively adapt to however big your display is. Okay, so now we can click on them and it looks like each one is sort of self-contained in its own sort of window area. Okay, so that is single page layout. Okay, so again, that's probably the most complex example we've looked at. But again, if you care about how it works fundamentally, by all means, go and look at the documentation of the things that I've mentioned. But if all you care about is what you need to write in order to get it to work, then by all means, I'll post this completed example, and you can take my code and probably not have to modify it that much to work with the same thing that you want to do.